My time has expired. Let me turn it over to Senator Grassley, then Senator Kane.
Before I ask my first question, I see that Dr. Barker wanted to respond to Dr. Rose. Why don't you do that?
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Thank you, Senator Grassley. I did not say that there were no studies indicating that variability of rainfall had an effect. I was saying that the studies that I reviewed found that there was no effect of rainfall on GDP growth.
Okay. Mr. McNally, I'm going to start with you. We've heard many politicized climate change narratives throughout our 12 climate change hearings. Unfortunately, the politicization of climate change isn't limited to the halls of Congress. How have international institutions, let's say like the International Energy Agency, allowed climate alarm to compromise their missions? And then, in your professional opinion, which is a greater threat to global energy security and the U.S. economy, climate change or top-down climate policy?
Thank you, Senator Grassley. The International Energy Agency was formed after the Arab oil embargo 50 years ago this month with a security mission, organize the collective use of strategic reserves, and then help us understand what's going on in oil and gas markets, including data and forecasts. And they have a bunch of hardworking, talented folks doing that, and their job is difficult. Unfortunately, and the saddest thing I've seen in my career professionally as a barrel counter, and someone spent most of his career just trying to predict what's going to happen, not influence it, is starting in 2020, the IEA stopped producing what we call current policy scenario or business as usual forecast, basically a base case that assumes policy in place today. They did that under environmental pressure because we were showing too much oil demand and too much oil supply. But by doing that, they deprived you and the Senate and the Congress of the tool you need to use to make cost-benefit assessments of policy options. You also duped the world into thinking that we're headed towards peak demand really soon. And that's very dangerous. And from that, they then come out and said there should be no more investment in oil and gas supply. Again, I think I can think of nothing more dangerous and disastrous for our near-term and medium-term energy outlook and national security outlook than were we to effectively make peak supply real by banning investment in new oil and gas production. And in my view, no question, although I'm not a climate scientist nor a climate modeler, when I see things like President Biden's call to outlaw the use of gas and coal and gas and coal and electricity by 2035, or ban the sale or mandate the restriction sale of ICE cars, cancel the Keystone Pipeline, much less the IEA's call to ban all upstream investment, I have no question that those policies would be much more costly than any reasonable benefits we get in any other area, including climate policy.
Dr. Barker, you've discovered faulty economic methods used to spread climate alarm and then revealed them to the world. What statistical tricks should objective listeners look to or look out for to differentiate climate change propaganda from economic accuracy? And then why do you think economists and others use these tricks in the first place?
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Well, some of the easy ones that we see in the popular media are talking about cost of climate change without putting them in context, either as a percentage of GDP or with growth. I mean, if we're projecting costs out many decades in the future, we need to think about what those costs are relative to the growth that we expect to see between now and then. Another is that studies that I've looked at that claim that there is some kind of optimal temperature for economic production have difficulty with the fact that a lot of poor countries happen to be also very warm countries. Now, people have debated for many years why that's the case, but we really don't know, and it's difficult to control for that and look at the actual effects of temperatures. But many are much harder, many of these tricks are much harder to see. I mean, for example, the papers I looked at use thousands of lines of code to shape the data, and assumptions are buried in those thousands of lines of code, or regressions that use 500 variables. And it requires a really close look to find some of the assumptions that are embedded in that work. Why do they do these tricks? Well, I think as an economist, we know that incentives matter. And when the incentive is to publish, people publish, and conclusions that fit the dominant ideas are easier to publish than papers that challenge those ideas.
Mr. Chairman, could I have 45 seconds to
Please.
kind of close up here? We continue to receive testimony that relies on extreme RCP 8.5 scenario. Climate scientist Dr. Roger Pekel testified in June that the real world is actually tracking below this extreme scenario. Dr. Pekel also said, quote, every day that we continue to prioritize the most extreme scenario in research and policy is the day that we mislead ourselves, end of quote. So, in summation, we should both invite climate scientists who have the ability to speak to the validity of scientific assertions, and there isn't a single senator or witness in this room who's qualified to do so right now. Thank you.